food ahead, though. Nada doing very well with his macro in this game. Of course, he does have more expansions. He does have more resources coming in. And looks like he's even having a little trouble keeping his mineral and gas count down. He's at 1,200 minerals, 700, 800 gas right now for Nada. And it looks like Fantasy's finally going to be able to clean up that tank there. Those tank is preventing the mining at the 9 o'clock position. But really, Fantasy is far behind in expansions, even though he has had command centers out. But unfortunately, command centers do not mine by themselves. And here's Nada coming south again with his forces. Just these constant harassing attacks by Nada, throwing his enemy off guard. And this is the difference that initiative makes in a battle. Really, if you ever read strategic guidelines about war, if you not strategic guidelines, but books about strategy. If you ever read Clausewitz, if you ever read even everything to the modern field guides for lieutenants in the army or whatever, you hear a lot about initiative. And initiative is definitely a big part of StarCraft, especially in Terran versus Terran, I think. It represents as most close, I think, to human combat as, well, obviously, it's Terran versus Terran. Anyway, here, Fantasy is trying to go for an attack, but once again, Nada has managed to squash him flat with another drop on top of him, and using his SCVs very well to defend here. Nada losing a couple of SCVs, but I think he's going to be able to once again, kill off this one attack here. So my point was basically, Nada has taken the initiative this entire game, and Fantasy has been constantly on the defense. And this is the difference it makes. When you're on the defense, you just obviously can't hurt your opponent, and you're constantly reacting to your opponent. You're constantly facing him on his ground of choosing. And now Fantasy finally trying to take the initiative. He's got a couple of turrets, actually. 4 turrets to try to take down the expansion at the upper left, so perhaps I spoke a little bit too soon. He's managed to get a drop in, and he's actually managed to separate the upper left from the rest of Nada's forces, and now he's taking down the expansions at the upper and the upper left for Nada. Nada, meanwhile, though, coming with dropships in the center, perhaps trying to go for an attack on the Fantasy's base while Fantasy's troops are far away. So Nada, perhaps, not wanting to fight Fantasy on his ground of choosing, once again is going on the attack, and this is the way that Nada plays very well. He's so aggressive. They call him the Tornado Terran for a reason. He's just like a whirlwind of attacks. He just comes in with just punches from everywhere, attacks from everywhere, as is common in modern military doctrine. That's what you want to do. But this time, actually, I think Nada's in a bit of trouble. He's now confined. He's the one now confined to his top, his main 3 bases, whereas Fantasy has managed to save his main bases, and I think he does have 2 expansions up and running in the corners now. And now, basically, Nada is now in the reverse position. Fantasy's equaled up the food count, and now he's going to be able to take the initiative in this game. I think what happened was Nada did finally overreach a little bit, and Fantasy's attack in the middle was quite successful. Nada was not prepared for it. So while I was trying to explain military doctrine to you guys, or at least my thoughts on it, looks like Fantasy has taken a bit of a lead in this game. Nada, I think, though, is certainly not completely out of the game by this point. I think he still has a dropship advantage. Once again, that is going to be able to allow him more initiative. I still think he is a better player in general, too. So I think he's better able to react while coming from behind. And now it looks like Fantasy was trying to walk into that siege line. That is not a good idea in any kind of warfare. Excuse me. And here we're seeing Nada load up again, I think, for another drop. I mean, even when you're talking about operations on a platoon level, what you want to do is still take the initiative. You really want to be the one pinning your opponents down with fire. You want to be the one attacking from a main stationary position and a flanking position. And of course, if you are talking about strategic warfare, it's all about the initiative. The greatest, most amazing advances in history, from the Blitzkrieg against Paris, against France in World War II, to the First Gulf War, were because the victor had the initiative and attacked from where your opponent wasn't expecting, force your opponent to choose to fight at your ground of choosing. Anyway, and air power certainly is a big part of it. Anyway, now we're seeing basically Fantasy trying to divide Nada's forces, divide Nada's map control in half, trying to take the 12 o'clock location. This is very, very smart. Reminds me of the Germans, of course, in 1940. going through the Ardennes and separating the Allied forces in half. And now Fantasy has the high ground here. He's managing to shell the natural expansion of Nada's, the second natural, at the 1 o'clock position. Nada's in big trouble, actually, because he has his bases split in half, and now he can be beaten piecemeal here. Nada needs a big drop on top of these sieged up tanks here. I think all they managed to do, though, was stop the mining at the second natural. I don't think they did that much damage, though. Nada still has a dropship advantage. He needs to get on top of the tanks, though. It's the only way he can really succeed here, and hope to take back the advantage in this game. And of course, Fantasy needs to make a couple of mistakes for Nada to be able to do it. Fantasy just carelessly walking into tanks there, though. And it's strange, actually. I'm very, very curious at why Fantasy withdrew from that golden position there. That beautiful position he had at 12 o'clock. I'm a little mystified at why Fantasy decided to retreat to the center of the map. That was almost like when the Germans had done the Ardennes offensive and had split the French and the German, the French and the British forces in half by racing to the English Channel, and then suddenly it's like they basically withdrew from that perfect position for no reason, and we just saw Fantasy do that for some reason. I think now he's trying to go for an attack at the upper left, but I think he would have been better off polishing off the second expansion of Nada's instead of drawing his forces back and stopping the split from happening. Or stopping his offensive, basically. And Nada is able to react now with a very well-placed dropship fleet there. Sorry, not fleet, but I guess just a dropship full of tanks there. So Fantasy forced back, and really I think that was a bit of a squandered opportunity by Fantasy. I think Nada is now once again able to mine at the 1 o'clock location. Oh, and some dropships are going to get intercepted here in the middle. Fantasy unloading here because he knows that he needs to protect those dropships with his tanks. And Fantasy now finally taking that 12 o'clock position again. That 12 o'clock is absolutely essential, and Nada once again forced to retreat. I think what Fantasy should have done was leave a couple of tanks here, as he might do now, and hold that position, stop Nada from mining at that position. And Nada now loading up with a couple more tanks and glides, perhaps doing another counter drop on top of Fantasy. And this is Terran versus Terran at a very high level here. You just see constant action, constant strategic action here, and it is a fun game a fun matchup to watch. Someone in my channel comments was asking why he hadn't watched a lot of Terran versus Terrans. It's generally, I do like to cast some Terran versus Terrans, but generally only when good players are around, because bad Terran versus Terran can turn out to be a very boring game, because basically the players will just macro up and hold siege positions instead of constantly attacking and adjusting positions, as we see here in this game between the two players. And I do like that much more. Nada now trying to build up a large dropship fleet. I think he might be going for a strategic attack at the lower left or at the main base. He needs, of course, to affect some kind of forward momentum here, some momentum. And here we're seeing Nada go down to the lower right. No, it looks like he's not going to just yet. And momentum, of course, is what Joe Lieberman said his campaign would get in 2004, just before he actually quit the race. He was like, I'm going to get some momentum. And then 2 weeks later, he was still at like 2%, and he lost the race. But yeah, now Nada pushing down towards the south side at the 3 o'clock position. He's got a bottom of the cliff drop here, and he might be following it up with a cliff drop. Now that he's managed to soften up the air defenses, killing off a couple of turrets, he might be able to get that very large drop off. And if that drop manages to pick off the production facilities, the factories, the critical factories of Fantasy before Fantasy can reinforce, that could make the difference in the game. That could swing in favor back to Nada. Of course, looking at the food count briefly, both are even at 150 right now. So this is going to come down to strategy, not macro here. Strategy and micro is going to what decides the day here. Here comes Nada with the dropship, and I don't think Fantasy was prepared for this. I have to say, I don't think Fantasy was prepared at all. Nada this time has a huge force of tanks, and he will be able to shell the tanks of the factories of Fantasy. Fantasy now going on the offensive. He's decided his main base is perhaps a lost cause at this point. Fantasy going all in here on Nada's main base and natural expansion. Nada still has his factories producing, though. He might be able to reinforce just from what he gets out of those factories. And Nada, meanwhile, tearing apart the factories of Fantasy. Nada, Fantasy, though, with a couple of dropships of his own, getting up to the high ground, and both players are just going at each other's throats. It's going to be very close. I have no idea who's going to win this at this point. It's going to come down